All right. Hi, everyone. I am Emily Reitz, the Director of Technology at NSGIC, and I'm here today to talk about the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, or NSDI, with Frank Winters. Frank has been in this industry for 37 years, and he spent most of that time in state government. So to start off, Frank, why the NSDI?
Well, thanks, Emily. Wow, 37 years. That's hard for someone that's 35 to say. But anyways, I feel like I'm 35. It flew by. Thanks for being here. Why the NSDI? Um, let's look at the big picture to start with. Many of the grand challenges facing our nation and our world are best understood in the context of space and time, and they're best managed there as well. Spatial data is key, but building spatial data can be really expensive and it can be really hard work. It's absolutely necessary. We are at this point where the only way to keep up with the demands of the data that we need for these grand challenges is to work together. And by its nature, the technology we're talking about is inherently collaborative.
Yeah, nice. So for those listening today, what can they expect?
Well, what I hope to accomplish is kind of create that common baseline on the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, the NSDI. My hope is that in the next few minutes, you, the listener, will really be kind of put at ease with your common understanding of the NSDI, what it is, what it could be, what it should be, and really what your role might be.
Yeah. Okay. So to start super basic, what is the NSDI?
Yeah, that's great. It's actually a harder question than you might expect. So feel at ease if you don't have the quick answer. But per the Geospatial Data Act, I'll refer to that as the GDA, the NSDI is the technology, the policies, the criteria, the standards, and the employees, although I'm not really an employee in this case, maybe we add volunteers to that, necessary to promote geospatial data sharing throughout the federal, state, tribal, local governments, private sector, including not-for-profits and higher education institutions. So it's in that definition, it's not the actual data. We'll get to that in a second. And the GDA, the Geospatial Data Act, is really silent on what themes are included.
Okay. So we've got the NSDI, we've got the GDA. There's a lot of acronyms here. So can we get just a little vocabulary lesson?
Absolutely. So let's start with the NSDI to reiterate. Technology, policies, criteria, standards, and employees really to facilitate data sharing across all those sectors. I also look at other parts of the NSDI and say the data sharing is not just here's my data, here's your data, we make this available. It's the shared responsibility for getting that data right and letting people all play the right role. So that's what the NSDI is to me, and it's my kind of interpretation of what's in the GDA, and that's really kind of the NSGIC view on that. So we'll move next into the Federal Geographic Data Committee, the FGDC, and that is representatives from 32 agencies on a committee that really shape the federal contributions and the federal responsibilities on the NSDI. Okay, so we go from the NSDI, which is national, not federal, to the FGDC focused on federal. Now, how does that work? It works because there's representation from all the sectors that feeds the FGDC. So the National Geospatial Advisory Council, the NGAC, currently has 14 members, and that is representatives from all the sectors, from private sector to federal, to state, local governments, and they have the role of advising FGDC on policies, priorities, and how to really get their work done. So NSDI, FGDC, NGAC feeding the advice to FGDC. And now let's talk about the actual data sets. So those data sets, there's a little bit of acronym here. The term National Geospatial Data Asset is really a category of geospatial data, and that data is needed by many. So for instance, imagery might be one of those, is one of those categories. The actual data sets, the National Geospatial Data Asset data sets, are the individual data sets that you can work on. You just can't work on imagery. you can work on a particular type of imagery to certain specs, and there's different types that come together to satisfy the needs of the theme. So the theme is the asset. The data sets are the pieces that we can actually put together to create that theme. So a little bit of vocabulary, hopefully that clears it up and gives us a little explanation. You can really think of the NSDI as an umbrella that encompasses all this. And most people do think of data when they think of the NSDI, but really, more importantly, it's the collaborative infrastructure, the people, the policies, and the ways of conducting work so we can all build it once and use it many times.
Okay. Nice. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Um, just a quick question, like while you were talking about that, you mentioned that NGAC, that's like a multi-sector committee or council. And so how do you find out who represents your sector?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and they're just published. They're on the web. So if you use
Oh,
your favorite web search engine and just look for NGAC member list, you'll find a list of those members. There's not necessarily contact information there, but at least you know who they are and what organization they belong to or are employed by. And then, really, the best bet would be to reach back out to NSGIC. All of those members have some representation in NSGIC, so we'll help you either find the contact on the committee, or we can help you at least have NSGIC's maybe more reachable, more available contact into that organization so you can feed up through them. But it really is a way that your voice can be heard. And NSGIC is happy to help funnel that. That's probably part of why we're here.
well, thank you. That was a very nice way of saying, let me Google that for you. Sounds
Yeah, right. Right.
yeah. Okay, so going back to the GDA. So what's at the core of that?
Yeah, there's one paragraph in the GDA that I will read to you here that to me is the core of the intent of the GDA. The GDA requires a lot of other stuff, but each covered agency shall coordinate and work in partnership with other federal agencies, agencies of the state, tribal, and local government institutions of higher education and private sector to efficiently and cost effectively collect, integrate, maintain, disseminate, and preserve geospatial data built upon existing non-federal geospatial data to the extent possible. So they're telling the federal agencies, and the GDA can only really dictate what the covered agencies, those that are in the purview and this law applies to, that they must collaborate and coordinate, and they must look externally first to the extent possible for sources of that data. So that's pretty great. That is a mandate to collaborate, and we're on board. It's not burdensome to the states in that that's what we're hungry for.
All
Um,
right.
so um, there's a little bit of difference. There could be difference of an opinion on how different organizations view the GDA. And is it mainly a federal reporting requirement and a responsibility, or is it mainly a blueprint and a mandate to collaborate? I'm hoping it's a little bit of both, but I'm hoping we emphasize the actual intent of the GDA is to really foster the collaboration. The reporting requirements, in NSGIC's opinion, are to have some accountability and to measure our success on the collaboration that we do and the efficiency that we gain.
So with all of that in mind, can you highlight a couple examples of where this is working really well?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at this. It's so much easier to kind of take a pattern that's working and apply it to other patterns than it is to rail against those things that we're frustrated with. And there is a level of frustration that is, it's appropriate. We all care, right? So the first one is the National Address Database. Addresses are assigned by local government. Those are rolled up typically by states. FGDC had an enlightened moment, and FGDC voted to use the NINA standard as the basis for the National Address Database. And that was not something everyone agreed upon, but they really took the input from other stakeholders outside of the federal government that made it clear that the use case of 911 is what caused most of the energy around getting that data right. The local governments really, really care that 911 calls are answered properly and the location of the address is paramount. So the NENA standard being connected with 911, the vote fell towards using the NENA standard. So that was a really good example of that collaboration and considering lots of perspectives. Private companies then have an interest in using that data, but then again, so do we. People of our nation are not coming to government websites to download millions of address points. They're experiencing our work using their phones or ordering their pizza or their package delivery. And that's the day-to-day transactions that they care to get the data right on. And then a side effect from that is that when the 911 call happens, that data has been exercised. And that's a great kind of a view of the whole supply chain. But there's one interesting missing piece that I didn't cover there, and that is Postal Service has an interest in getting addresses right, but the addresses are signed by local government. Postal Service has the value add of defining the zip codes. That is clearly their purview. So the Postal Service right now is working with the folks at US DOT on a plan to have them get all of the zip codes correct on the actual address points. So that's just think about that whole data supply chain. We've got local governments, state governments, we've got not-for-profits with the standards, we've got all different use cases, we've got private sector, federal agencies supporting it, another federal agency adding their value add to the data, and it goes to our citizens just as part of their normal course of action. And in doing so, if we can make transportation and delivery and people driving around some tiny percent more efficient, think of the impact, the societal impact that we've made. So that is a model to reproduce. And it's like I said, it wasn't all easy to do, but here we are, we're collaborating. It's not complete, so we've got some work to do to close the gaps and make that a comprehensive nationwide data set. But it's great where it's way more than half the nation. That data is really ticking along great. So I think about the terms of data supply chain. Where is the upstream? Who touches it? How often and when? And how does it go back? And how does it maximize its impact? That data supply chain is different for every data theme. Let's look at the U.S. Census and the decennial census as another example. A radically different data supply chain. The Census Bureau has both the mandate and some funding to collect the census. So it's clearly theirs to start with. It's a federal data set. Yet the census needs addresses, boundaries, roads. They need the right hydro to make all that geography work, and they need that stuff all updated because all of that is dynamic data, as we know. So they reach out to local governments for addresses and roads, for instance. Maybe they reach out to other federal partners to make sure they have the right hydro to make census geography. And all that comes together, and they've got big processes to do that nationwide. Now, a cool example is that in New York, there's an MOU with the census between the state of New York and the census. And it really instructs that instead of running their normal process for outreach to local governments, the Census Bureau works directly with the state GIS office and adds another use case to the collaboration that is already happening and the coordination that's already happening. Instead of going out to local governments with a duplicative ask and local governments are saying, we already gave this to the state, why are the feds asking? Well, that doesn't happen in New York because the Census Bureau was receptive and understood the needs and how this impacts local governments and worked with us. So, another great example of just that collaborative, non-bureaucratic, but managing something different in a state where you have something different to contribute. So a couple of really good examples, but you think about those data supply chains, they're very different.
Yeah, definitely. So then why do you think there are different ideas on like what the NSDI is?
Yeah, that's great. And I don't think that there's necessarily that's always a problem because there's room for differences in perspective on the NSDI for a couple of reasons. One is that many of us play different roles. An address authority in local government has a whole different lens than the 911 coordinator who's trying to dispatch calls, from the person in the not-for-profit, working on the standards, from the federal person that's rolling it up, from the private company that's trying to satisfy their customers. Those are very different roles. So we all kind of look at it differently. And theme by theme, there's different data supply chains. So there's differences in all of that. But if we boil it down to, let's have the courage to go back to the intent of the GDA, and that is to make sure we collaborate and build it once and use it many times. So at the core, we can all look at it the same, but the way we actually conduct our work every day is appropriately different because we have different roles.
Okay, cool. So then with those different perspectives and everything, like, is there an end goal in mind, or like how do we know when we're done with the NSDI?
Yeah, that's the question that I think frustrates a lot of people. Like, we've been at this so long, how come we're not done? And sure, there could be some more collaboration that have happened over the years, but right now, I think that the climate is really ripe for a big change in how we're seeing that. We're just seeing great collaboration across lots of sectors, and a hunger for it. But I hope we're never done. I hope that the use cases continue to grow in reality, and uh, more intense use of higher and higher resolution to solve more and more realistic problems, and just it continues to grow in a way that we have a higher demand for higher spatial and temporal resolution. Now, will we ever be finished? Because I think the demand will continue to outstrip our ability to meet that need with the spatial data. And that's fine. We'll be playing catch up, and we'll leave a red trail of goodness along the way. But I think in a few years, we're going to look back at this point in time and say, oh, wow, we really are collaborating. Folks they really are considering the inputs, the needs, and the impact that their decisions have on other people in the data supply chain. And they really will start thinking about this as a healthy ecosystem. I think that's already changing. So in one regard, we'll never be done. In the other regard, I think we're going to just sort of take it for granted, have to deliberately look to say, yeah, we've come a long way in our ability and our need to collaborate. And by working in that way, we're not talking about putting more hours in at the office. We're just talking about looking at it differently, and feeling good about our contribution because part of something way bigger than ourselves or just our agency.
Yeah, much more complex than tick done. Got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you. This has been really fun. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, going back in my career and my role, I used to think of contributing to national data sets as altruistic. We really had everything thought we needed in order to get the work done of the state agencies we were working for. But now I've realized that collaboration, considering the needs and perspectives of players all along the data supply chain, is the only way to efficiently manage the data we need, and the only way to also maximize the positive impact on our work on the people of this nation, and the people of our constituents, our people, and the customers of the private companies we partner with. They're the same people. So closing thought there is also look forward to more NSGIC podcast and a series bringing in different perspectives on the NSDI, because we're going to kind of model the behavior and have people in that look at it differently, and we'll talk through it, and together we'll advance this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. This was really fun.